Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar, which is brought to you by sharedserviceslink and sponsored by Tungsten Network. Today we are looking at achieving financial automation, specifically within the healthcare industry. My name is Susie West. I'm the founder and CEO at sharedserviceslink, and I'm very pleased to be presenting an extensive and very well-informed lineup of speakers today. So we have as our panel facilitator Chad Brophy, who is Vice President Commercial Operations at Tungsten, and he is interviewing three panelists today. So a healthcare expert within Tungsten, who's Peter Smith, Senior Director Global Account Management at Tungsten, and Lydia Rojas, who is Accounts Payable Manager at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. And also joining the panelists as those who are going to be interviewed is Ben Sandlin, who is Supervisory Financial Manager at Veterans Administration. As always, ladies and gentlemen, you have a vital role to play, which is to make sure that you absolutely get the most out of your investment of time. 60 minutes is a long period of time for all of us. There's a lot that we can be doing, so make sure that every minute works for you, and to really make sure that you're getting the most out of this investment of time, get those nagging questions that you've got at the forefront or somewhere in the back of your mind answered. So how you do that is you write your question in your GoToWebinar panel, which we've highlighted here in red for you, and you submit that to me directly. I will then take your question, and in the last 10 minutes of this webinar, I will be putting your question to our experts. So please make sure you stay on the line for the last 10 minutes as well. Let's have a look at the agenda for the next 60 minutes. I'm going to touch on the context for this session, and then I'm going to be handing over to Chad, who's going to start putting his questions to our panelists. We'll then take your questions, as I mentioned, in the last 10 minutes of this webinar. So let's just have a look at the context of this session. The healthcare industry, as I'm sure many of you are hugely aware of, has a huge number of regulations and applicable not only to practitioners within the healthcare industry, but people that do business with organizations in the healthcare industry. So particularly when it comes to financial automation within this industry, there needs to be a real kind of intense awareness as to what regulations you need to be following, what requirements you need to be following, and also just to make sure that you're compliant with HIPAA, but also other regulatory requirements as well. So there's a big focus, big pressure on you to be educated, aware, up to speed, and knowing where all the kind of the changes are taking place within regulatory requirements as well. So we're going to be talking specifically in this session about what to be aware of as far as when you get involved in financial automation, working in the healthcare industry, and also wider kind of challenges to be overcome when automating accounts payable as well. So with that in mind, I would like to introduce our facilitator for today, who is Chad Brophy. Over to you, please, Chad.
Thank you, Susie. I appreciate that, and thank you very much for those of you that have given us an hour of your day today. I'd like to take a quick minute and kind of introduce Tungsten. You may not be familiar with that name, but you may be familiar with the name OB10. And back in October of 2013, OB10 was acquired by Tungsten, and now we're part of a larger publicly held company, and we're focused on really accelerating trade, and that's by enabling touchless invoice processing, strengthening cash flow, and enabling better buying decisions. And as an organization, we operate globally. We work with many, many blue chip and industry-leading organizations and currently process a little over $190 billion in spend across our network. And the network itself is compliant in 47 countries, and compliance is one of the topics that we're going to cover today, and that's specific to healthcare. Within the network, we have over 171,000 active suppliers, and as Susie mentioned, it's not only the healthcare providers, but it's also, you know, those who do business in healthcare that these regulatory items really do impact. And while we're focused and experienced in all kinds of different industries, you know, we're going to focus on healthcare today. And we're going to talk about areas for healthcare organizations to consider when looking to adopt an automation capability like electronic invoicing, which seems to be today not a luxury or a nice to have. It seems to be something that everybody is moving towards. And, you know, even though the whole purchase-to-pay process is not that different from, say, you know, large organizations like a Hewlett-Packard or a Kraft, those organizations don't have that regulatory element that they have to consider. And that's where, in the healthcare industry, it's unique. So we hope today, with our panelist discussions, you'll be able to learn from experiences from Ben and Lydia that they'll share from their organizations, as well as Peter, who manages other clients for us. We hope to be able to share a good amount of information, and you're able to take something away. So before we jump into introductions to Peter and Ben and Lydia, I'd like to turn it back over to Susie to do a couple of quick poll questions from the audience.
That's great. Many thanks, Chad. So coming up on the screen now, we're just wanting to find out a little bit about where you are at in terms of utilizing various accounts payable technology today. So please take all that apply. Which of the following do you leverage today? Are you actively using an e-invoicing network like the Tungsten network? Are you using scanning or OCR technology within your accounts payable? Are you using EDI for some of your invoices? Are you receiving PDFs sent from your suppliers or emailed from your suppliers and then handling those? Or are you mainly receiving paper invoices and obviously having to manually enter them? So please give us an idea as to what your level of adoption is as far as technology is concerned within accounts payable. We do like to try and get these percentages up nice and high. We're currently at 50% of you responding. Let's see if we can get a few more of you responding, please. So which of the following do you leverage today? An e-invoicing network, scanning or OCR, EDI, emailed PDFs, or paper today? Closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. We were at 57% of you responding. Let's have a look and see what the responses are like for the benefit of those who are only joining this webinar for the first time as a Shared Services Link webinar attendee. We always share the results live, so it's great benchmarking information for you. Okay, you can see it was multiple choice, but many of you, 83% of you are receiving invoices through an emailed PDF, followed by 58% coming in at scanning, an OCR, 33% an e-invoicing network, then 33% mainly paper, and 17% of you are actually doing EDI. So an interesting spread there, but what this really tells us is that potentially there's still a lot of kind of manual components to your invoicing process today. Okay, let's move on to the second of our back-to-back polls coming up on your screen. Now, let's find out what kind of scope you are potentially dealing with today. So, coming up on your screen, should be appearing very shortly, how many invoices do you receive from your suppliers each year? So if you can tick the box relevant to you, less than 100,000 per annum, 100,000 to 250,000 per annum, 250 to 500,000, or more than 500,000 invoices each year. If you could just let us know how many invoices you receive each year. If you don't know the exact number, please have a fairly good educated estimate and tick the box that applies to you. It's too much of a coincidence. We are again on 57%. So if you haven't already responded, please do so. Closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look at the results coming up on your screen now. Quite an even spread up until about 500,000 invoices. So 33% of you are processing less than 100,000, 33% between 100,000 and 250,000, and 25% of you are processing 250,000 invoices to 500,000, And only 8% of you processing more than 500,000 invoices today. Interesting results. Back to you, please, Chad.
Great, thank you. So before we get into the panel discussion, I'd like to take a moment and have Ben and Lydia, as well as Peter, introduce themselves and share a little bit about their experience, their role in their organization, and provide a little bit of background on their organization so that as we get into the areas that we're going to cover, there's good context in there. So real quick, let me have Ben, why don't you take a minute and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the operation at the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs Financial Shared Service Center.
Sure, thanks. Again, I'm Ben Sandlin. I'm a supervisory financial manager. And what that means really in my organization is that I'm responsible for several teams that deal with processing of our commercial invoices. The mailroom I'm responsible for, scanning team I'm responsible for, also a validation, a payment resolution team, and our customer care center. So you can see that pretty much from soup to nuts, I'm in the middle of processing our commercial invoices. And the Financial Services Center is a payment center, essentially. And we've centralized, when I say we, I mean the VA, has centralized the payments of commercial invoices at the Financial Services Center. So what that really means is all those medical centers, those clinics, the cemeteries, national cemeteries that are out there, they send all their commercial invoices to us for processing. So that kind of tells you the scope of my interest and involvement in electronic invoicing. I just, as a final point, add that we've been implementing electronic invoicing since 2007. Thanks.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ben. Lydia, how about you at Dana-Farber? Well, I don't know if we're having a small technical detail. Why don't we, well, hopefully Lydia will be able to join us. Peter, why don't you take a minute and introduce yourself and explain your role?
Sure thing. Thanks, Chad. So I work at Tungsten Network. I joined here from the banking industry, so I have a lot of treasury and AP experience. What I do at Tungsten is to manage global accounts for us. I am based in New York, but I have a number of clients. Dana-Farber is one of them. Most of my clients are operating in different parts of the world, many of those parts of the world in some cases. So I'm hoping as we get into the discussion to bring a perspective on what other healthcare and pharmaceutical companies are doing in this space, as well as companies in other areas.
Great. Thanks, Peter. Lydia, have you been able to connect back with us?
Right here, sir. Hi, my name is Lydia.
All right,
great. I'm from Dana-Farber Cancer Institute in Massachusetts. We have a smaller institute, compared to the VA. And just wanted to mention that we do not have any beds. Most of our invoices are commercial, and we were extremely interested in growing our e-invoice solution, and also replace a program that was terminating in 2014.
Great, thank you. All right, so let's get into the discussion, and what we'll do is we'll start at probably the very beginning. That's most organizations go through, and it's, how do you choose a platform? What's right for you? And we'll focus today on electronic invoicing. What I'd like to do is have the panelists, Lydia and Ben, share with us some of the key criteria that you used, and then also sort of address what we see in the industry is, when you think about electronic invoicing, was it something that you did separate as an isolated project to address a very specific situation, or was it part of a broader purchase-to-pay strategy or purchase-to-pay theme? So why don't we start with Ben. Ben, why don't you share a little bit, and as Ben talked about, they have centralized their invoice receipt and payment process in in a single shared service center, so their scope is very large. And so, what were some of the key criteria to the VA that were really important?
Sure, I'd be happy to, Chad. Well, in a word, probably the first is robust system. We've already talked about our volume, that it's very large. To give you an idea, we process approximately 1.2 million invoices a year. So yeah, about 100,000 invoices each month. So robust, it certainly needs to be that, and I think we've certainly achieved that because in the past several years we've been able to onboard approximately 22,000 of our 30,000 vendor community, and as I mentioned, we're getting in about 50,000 invoices a month over the Tungsten network, and then the rest are made up of EDI invoices, and we've got a smaller, less capable system for electronic invoices that we created in-house that makes up the remaining of those. So robust is a strong criteria, was a strong criteria for that, and Tungsten network is certainly that. Also flexible. Had to be flexible, both the system and organizationally. Tungsten's been very flexible. To be specific, their integrated solution was unique, I think, when we made our selection. There's lots of organizations out there that provide a web form, and Tungsten does that too. But when we made our selection, it was very rare to have anyone that had an integrated solution. Integrated meaning that they mapped into the vendor's accounting system directly and completely automated the system. So that was a flexible element that we caught our attention. They're also flexible in that not only do they have the invoice, but they also gave us the ability, or our vendor community, the ability to upload an attachment. And talking with my point of contact there at Tungsten that I deal with pretty much on a daily basis, that's not something that all the vendor communities out there require, but it's an important element for us. I won't say that most of our vendors include attachments, but certainly a significant amount of them, because the certifying officials want that extra guarantee that the government receive those services, because these are taxpayer dollars, and we want to be a good steward of the taxpayer dollars. So, yeah, those are the two things that really stand out to us: robust and flexible. And organizationally, Tungsten's been very flexible. We've got some unique characteristics and things that we have to adhere to in the government that are directed by the Prompt Payment Act. And they've been very flexible in assuring that we get those data points that we need to be in compliance with the Prompt Payment Act. And yes, it was part of a broader P2P theme. We've also are in the process of implementing a new certification system right now that we're rolling out, and we've got about 3 more weeks before it's completely rolled out to our stations. And I'm sorry, when I say stations, I'm talking about the hospitals, clinics, and cemeteries that are out there spread out nationally. So those are the elements I think that we concentrated on, and the broader theme also.
Lydia, Dana-Farber, I don't think has been at this as long as the VA, and clearly you're not the size and scale of a Veterans Affairs. So why don't you share, the key criteria that you used when evaluating, and talk a little bit about that in relation to your overall P2P strategy.
Sure. For us, we wanted a solution that was going to be flexible and that would provide multiple options. We were very excited that there was the alternative for the vendors to either use the web or the interface options available with Tungsten. We also liked that we had the benefit for the vendors where the invoice was received, there was approval information, and also payment information. We needed a system that provided attachment and also invoice templates, which we can now download into our ERP system. What we liked is that their campaign service was very key to us, especially since we needed to have all these vendors from the expired system to the new system in Tungsten. So those were the items that we were looking for, and we did find in Tungsten.
Great, great. So one of the things that we're going to focus on here in the next topic is the compliance aspect. You know, the unique elements, relative to healthcare. And so as we get into the second topic, we can talk about HIPAA compliance, and where within your process, if you think about the invoice-to-pay cycle, suppliers today, they can provide all kinds of information on invoices, and with HIPAA regulations being about personal health information and protecting that, let's talk a little bit about your experiences and how you handle PHI and what your involvement is in AP, and then specifically as you think about the legacy invoice process, when you moved to an electronic process with electronic invoicing, were there any specific changes that you needed to make either system-wise or organizationally or operationally to be able to handle or account for that? So Lydia, why don't we start with you in talking about HIPAA and PHI at Dana-Farber?
So for Dana-Farber, every employee and every person here is responsible for the confidentiality of patient information. But we were actually very pleased to know that with Tungsten we were able to receive some information in a very secure connection and file, which then was passed into our ERP system into a secure file. So that was one of the positive things that we learned from Tungsten. And the other piece of it is that the majority of our vendors it's 60% of our vendors are commercial invoices, and the smaller piece of it, it falls into the HIPAA compliance for Dana-Farber.
Okay, so you have scenarios where these commercial suppliers could potentially provide patient-related information on an invoice, and so you've got
correct.
Systems and processes and policies in place to be able to manage that at the AP level.
Yes, we do.
Okay. Ben, what about the VA? I mean, clearly, you're part of the government, right? And this is a regulation issued by the government. I would assume that you have to adhere to that. You're held to a little bit of a higher standard because it's a government standard. How does that operate at the VA?
Well, we have a separate system that we put in our medical claims forms that contain that PHI. And yes, it's very secure and it's HIPAA compliant. The particular system here at the Financial Services Center that Tungsten feeds is strictly for commercial invoices. And of course, we can't control what the our vendors put on those invoices as they submit them. Tungsten helps us out a little bit with that on a front-end edit that will catch some of that. But we also take in, or have been submitted to us, CMS 1500 forms, claim forms. Those are the HIPAA-protected information that's on there. And we have a method here of when it goes to our business rules of catching that and pushing it out into a manual queue, which our folks will then correctly direct it to our medical claims processing system, or it'll be rejected back to the vendor with an explanation why and direction of where they can submit that healthcare claim form. So again, ours is mostly, what I deal with here mostly is commercial invoices. So we pay, everything from rubber gloves all the way up to EKG machines for our veterans hospitals that are out there. But HIPAA is outside of our electronic invoicing mandate for our commercial vendors.
Okay, great. So that really talks to the point that there's a lot of communication that has to go on both internally and externally. So that sort of leads us to that next topic, which is what from experience, how do you launch internally and externally? It's not just as simple as, hey, an invoice comes in, we're going to get it into a system and we're gonna pay it, right? So there's a lot of education that has to go on internally with the key people, as well as you mentioned, suppliers, right? Even on the commercial side. And I know at Dana-Farber, some of the invoices could come in with, PHI, so this is an opportunity for you to collaborate with suppliers. Let's talk a little bit about the experiences that you went through and how you handled both that internal education to the folks within your organizations who are going to interact with this, as well as sort of that outbound touch to your suppliers. So Lydia, how were things handled internally with educating people within the organization about how this new system would be? How did you go about handling that at Dana-Farber?
In Dana-Farber, we sat with a group of individuals, including the purchasing department and key departments that have the most highest orders for Dana-Farber. And one of the items that we do use the system with a purchase order, so no orders will go through with a purchase orders in our case. And that actually facilitates for invoices to come through, matched to the PO, and paid within the payment terms agreed with the vendor. We also ensure to set up some meetings with some of the department. We provided information in the intranet, in the accounts payable, so that anyone has access to it immediately. And we also did a one-to-one conversation in some of the departments that needed a little bit of hand-handling.
Okay. So from a supplier perspective, does Dana-Farber mandate the use of electronic invoicing to your suppliers?
As a cancer care, we were very careful about our message, so we used the phrase strongly recommended. And we have a good result, but we probably would have had a better result if we would have mandated for vendors to join the program.
Okay, great.
Chad,
great.
This is Peter. Let me add on that. A bit of context across the different customers that we have at Tungsten. What Lydia described is just the right way to go about it. That partnership between finance or AP and procurement is very important, and that's true whether or not you have a quote-unquote mandated program. That's whether or not you're in a position to mandate varies by the culture of the company and the nature of the transactions that you're doing. But it's actually more important when you have a lighter mandate to have that collaboration between procurement and finance, because once you get into the enrollment side of these programs, having a coordinated message coming from all sides is very important to drive adoption.
Absolutely, absolutely. Ben, having known, been around and seen the varying degrees of success with the program to the VA, you guys have sort of experienced, I would say, the full spectrum of approach to working with suppliers. So why don't you share a little bit about the history of the program at the VA relative to supplier, onboarding and enrollment?
Yeah, too true, Chad. Too true. It's been quite a ride. Our internal education, of course, started here within the building at the Financial Services Center, and that went pretty smoothly, as you could probably guess. There was some training and becoming familiar, and Tungsten, then OB10, now Tungsten, they had a hand in educating the folks here that would be dealing with our vendor community as we went through the campaigns. But there was another level of internal communication, and that was to the VA-wide. So to all those stations out there, the hospitals, the cemeteries, and the clinics, we had to educate them too, because they were going to be dealing with the vendors there in their local community. And also they're going to see something slightly, well not slightly, very different from their normal invoices that they saw. Because you can well imagine invoices come in all shapes and sizes and colors, and part of the reason why we went to electronic invoicing was to kind of streamline that and make it more uniform. So we had to educate those other VA employees out there, and we did that a variety of ways. There are financial conferences, of course, that are always going on, so we would make that a topic of those financial conferences. We would be having, of course, like any other organization, routine financial officers discussion, conference calls, meetings, and again, there was an opportunity for us to put electronic invoicing and OB10 at that point, now Tungsten, as a topic of those routine meetings and calls. But we also have what we call a news flash that we send out from the Financial Services Center to all the financial organizations in those hospitals and clinics and cemeteries. And we use that several different times throughout the years to announce the electronic invoicing initiative and significant adjustments or changes to that initiative. And we also offer dedicated training on electronic invoicing to the stations. We did that for about a 3-month period. Every other, or twice a week rather, Tuesdays and Thursdays, we would hold dedicated training for them so that they were familiar with it. Of course, so that was the internal. The external, of course, we relied mostly on Tungsten. We gave Tungsten our vendor community's information, and then they would reach out to them and announce the initiative and give them directions, websites that they could go to, government websites to confirm that this was legitimate, and talk about the process and the steps that they had to go through it. For the external communication and kind of lessons learned, we were kind of our own worst enemy in that regard, in that we were already paying their invoices, our vendor community's invoices, in a timely fashion and accurately. We were, and still are, upwards of 98, 99% accurate and timeliness for our payments. So the vendor community was, hey, it's not broken. Why are you trying to fix it? You're paying us on time. You're paying us accurately. So they were resistant, and I'm talking in a general stance here. They were resistant at first to coming on, or if they were resistant, those were the reasons that they were giving us for it. So that was kind of a lesson learned. I don't know if you really how to overcome that, except to continue to talk about how fast and quick and efficient electronic invoicing is. And I guess another lesson learned that came out to us was having the communication to the vendors come from a .gov address. In retrospect, that kind of sounds like a, well, duh, but that's not proud to admit that and to share that dirty laundry with you, but that was definitely something that I think would have prevented many of the communications from going into spam folders or someone thinking that there was a phishing expedition going on. So that was a lesson learned. And yes, we have mandated, but we didn't start out with a mandate. Much like Lydia, we started out with strongly suggesting that they join it and talking to them the logic about that. But we did eventually mandate it in 2012, and we didn't rip it like a Band-Aid and start returning all invoices that were coming to us paper immediately. We engaged with our vendor community and have that dialogue going on, and Tungsten was a critical part of that, letting them know that the mandate was out there in the Federal Register and they must move over to electronic invoicing. So we started that communication in January of 2013, but it was in July of 2013 that we started returning invoices unpaid to the vendors and directing them to go to Tungsten. So that kind of, I hope, gives you kind of a breadth and depth of our journey on this initiative.
Yeah, that's great, Ben. And again, we've seen some significant numbers and changes as we go. So Ben, in terms of approaching suppliers, when you think back, did the VA approach all suppliers, or did you go through an exercise where you carved out specific groups? And if it was a group, how did you determine that? I mean, what did you use? I hear that all the time, in our interactions with prospective clients, as they sort of want to understand, well, how do we approach the suppliers and what's the best practice, and how do we handle this, and who does the onboarding? So can you talk a little bit about the approach that you took and how you define things?
Yeah, absolutely. Have to keep in mind, of course, it's going to be unique for every organization. have to keep in mind what our role is in this. I mentioned earlier, we're a payment processing center. So some folks might go after or prioritize by spend. We did not. There's a big spend that goes out of this building. It's $13 million annually. But did I say million? I meant billion with a B. Sorry. 13 billion in spend. But that's not really our money. And what I mean by that is that the appropriated funds don't come to the Financial Services Center. They go to the Veterans Health Administration, the clinics and hospitals and cemeteries are out there. Our place in this process is just to take in the invoice and then accurately and efficiently and quickly get it out into our certification system where those certifying officers at the hospitals, clinics, and cemeteries can log on and certify that invoice for payment. So we certainly track spend, but for us, it's the volume of invoices annually that come in. So that's the way we organize or prioritize our campaign. We would go out for those after first, those vendors that were sending in 15, 20,000 invoices a year to us. And so that's the way we went after it. And we started with what's known as a managed campaign by Tungsten. So there's a alert that goes to the contact that we have for the company that gives them the information about the mandate, gives them the information about Tungsten, then OB10, and about the VA and all the logic and reasoning for moving to electronic invoicing, and then contact information where they could get in touch with Tungsten and begin the process. Because certainly for the larger vendors that we have that do send in 10, 15,000 invoices a year, the integrated solution that I mentioned earlier would be appropriate for them, and that does take some time to implement. But if we did not get a contact from them, then Tungsten would initiate contact with them, meaning a telephone call or continued email contacts. And if they received any resistance or no contact at all, reply at all, that's when my team here would get involved, and we would contact them and try to facilitate the onboarding. So that's what we started out with and worked through for several years. And we had some success initially. We were up to about 28% as late as fiscal year 2012. But the tipping point was really that mandate that we put in at the end of 2012 and into 2013. That with that mandate in hand, we went from 28.7% all the way up to 64.3%. So a significant gain in just 1 year. And as I said, that mandate was the tipping point for that. And it was relatively slow up till that point, but once we had that in hand, it got very busy around here.
Sure.
So that was the managed campaign. Now we just rolled into what Tungsten calls Ignite campaigns, routine Ignite campaigns. We send across to Tungsten information on new vendors that join our vendor community, and then Tungsten reaches out to them at the first of each month, again with email communication, the vendor's information preloaded into Tungsten because we've given that to them. And then all the vendor needs to do is select a hyperlink, and they go in and confirm their information, and they are registered. So it's a pretty smooth routine right now that we're finding, knock on wood, but that's, again, kind of our journey.
Great, great, great. And it sounds like we've got more, supplier enrollment and onboarding is an ongoing exercise. It's never just an event in these journeys. So, Lydia, let's talk a little bit about Dana-Farber. So I think you're at Dana-Farber's at a different place in time on this journey. Talk a little bit about how Dana-Farber approached, that supplier, onboarding, enrollment, and talk a little bit about what you've got planned here in the near future.
Yes. For Dana-Farber, when we took on board this project, we were in the need of replacing our expired ERP system for e-invoicing. So that was our main goal. And that was about 10% of our full EDI invoices that we currently receive. And that was one group. Then we decided to approach the design vendors, and then the second piece of it was what opportunities are out there that we can open the doors and try to receive more invoicing solutions. So we chose to look at vendors that we have activity for the past year and a half, and we launched a campaign with two huge groups. One is to move or transfer the vendors from the old system to the new system, and then reaching out to new vendors. That started happening somewhere in the middle of 2013. And as of today, we have duplicated the vendors that we have brought on board. So not only did we were able to bring most of our pre-existing e-invoice vendors to the new solution with Tungsten, but we also have duplicated the number of vendors that now are part of the Tungsten e-solution. We receive about 30% of our EDI invoices, and by looking at the numbers of the vendors that have signed a contract that are currently sending us invoices, we expect to receive 3 times the number of invoices that we're previously receiving. So that is for us within the past 6 months, and be able to duplicate the number of e-invoices for Dana-Farber. It's a fantastic project in itself.
That's great, and it seems like you guys are off to a quick start in terms of getting the conversion of suppliers not only from that existing system that was decommissioned, but also being able to go out and get new vendors. So Peter, you clearly work closely with Dana-Farber, but you work with other clients out there. What are you seeing in terms of how some of these clients are approaching suppliers? Is it the big bang theory? And if they're doing big bang, what are they using as sort of the focal point for suppliers? Because really it's all about adding value to the suppliers. Mm-hmm. As Lydia and Ben have said, for Ben it was, hey, suppliers are saying you're already paying our invoices accurately, you're paying on time, and now you want us to change the way we're doing things. What can you share with the group around that?
Yeah, well, we typically see a couple of scenarios here. I'll pick up on one thing that I heard Ben say, which is they started with what we would call a softer mandate, strongly recommended. That's often the place that most companies will start, partly because they're going into something that's new for them as well as new for the suppliers, and it takes some time to get, number one, to get comfortable with how our process works, and also to get over the anxiety that suppliers are going to be pushing back on you. Then what I'm seeing with a pretty good handful, probably about half of my customers who started that way, eventually, maybe a year or so into the program, they've gotten comfortable. The earth hasn't come to a halt, and they begin to realize that what the benefits are. Sometimes they'll begin to see an improvement in efficiency in their AP department, large reduction in inquiry volumes from suppliers, and they want to get more of that. And it's at that point that they'll typically go to a stronger mandate. So that's one group, probably the majority group.
Okay.
There's 2 other groups. One will go at the program, all in, jumping in at the deep end of the pool, bringing in, every conceivable supplier. And we love that approach, but it's one that takes a little bit more advanced planning, because I think Ben was alluding to this a little bit. You have to be prepared to, really go through that in an extremely systematic way. Know that you have, not only does Tungsten have the staff to do that, which we do, but that your AP and procurement departments are ready for that. It can be an extremely effective approach, though. I've got customers who are getting up to, overall north of 90% electronic transactions using an approach like that. The third group is, a little bit less interested in the program overall. Sometimes that's because there are multiple solutions in place. They may have EDI, they may have 2 or 3 or maybe even more approaches to getting invoices in-house. One thing we often see a lot of is the view that getting a PDF invoice by email amounts to an electronic transaction. So in cases like that, this is one of a number of options, Tungsten, and you don't necessarily get the same level of focus, but you also don't get the same level of benefit.
Right. So those are all great points, and as these programs go on, Lydia and Ben, I'm sure you can speak to this. You constantly are being asked to measure, right? How do you track success? I'd like real quick, if you could, Lydia, let's start with you because you're somewhat new into this. What are some of the key metrics that you track, and just highlight a couple of the really key successes that you've seen early on in the program? Because I know that the audience is always tasked with trying to get a quick return or get a quick win within these types of programs.
Yes, so for Dana-Farber, one of the items that I'm tracking is the number of calls coming into accounts payable inquiring on invoices, and that automatically has reduced. I've spoken to several of the vendors, and they're very pleased to see the flow and the status of the invoices right there, readily available to them in Tungsten, including payment information. So that was one of the key items, and good turnaround. The other piece of it is the number of invoices coming in. Even after 6 months of going live, we have duplicated the invoicing solution for us. So that piece, we have lost, for example, 1.5 positions, and immediately we have felt the relief of the data entry piece of it. So that has been a quick turnaround for us too. Great.
Ben, what about the program at the VA? I mean, obviously you were really good on-time payments and payment accuracy, which are usually a couple of KPIs that I see most organizations measure. What have you been measuring, and what were some of the quick successes that you've had on those items that you measure?
Sure. Well, yeah, we were paying very accurately and very timely, and the reason we were doing that is because we had technicians putting their eyes on each and every invoice that came through to make sure that they were correct, and that our optical character recognition had pulled out data and put it into the correct field. So that's incredibly manual intensive. So what we were able to do is still achieve that same accuracy, if not more so, but with less personnel. So we had a staff reduction. We were able to reassign folks to other tasks, and we had, in 2009, 145 federal employees in 6 different teams working our payment processing system. We've since reduced to 109 federal employees in 5 different teams as of 2014, and we expect that we'll be able to reassign these even more federal employees to different tasks as this becomes even more mature. But again, keep in mind what we do here. We're a payment processing system center, so for us, the percentage of invoices paid electronically, that is one of our key metrics also. I mentioned before that we jumped in 2013 up to 64.3%. FY14, we closed out at 75.3% of our invoices are paid electronically. And over the last 6 months, we've been bumping around between 77% and 80%. So we're still trending upward, and we expect that once we get our final key vendor community, which is utilities, on board, that we'll broach the 90% mark then. At least that's our expectation.
That's your goal. Yeah, that's
Correct.
Your goal. So great. And I want to be sensitive to the time here. So that's going to conclude our our coverage of sort of the key items that we wanted to cover. I'm going to turn it back over to Susie to wrap up the rest of the session. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Lydia. And thank you, Peter.
You're welcome.
Very welcome.
That's great. Many thanks. Many thanks indeed, Chad. That's great. So actually, just before we go into questions, let's just do our final poll question for the day. So coming up on your screen now, our third and final poll question, ladies and gentlemen, coming up on your screen now. Where are you in your e-invoicing journey today? If you could tick the one that applies to you, please. Would you say that you're mature, you're live with e-invoicing and you have been live for more than 5 years? You're getting there, you're well into your e-invoicing program, but it's less than 5 years old. You're just starting out, you are about to go live, or you've perhaps just gone live with your project. You're in the evaluating phase, so you perhaps have decided that this is something conceptually that you really must be doing. You just haven't actually set out your chosen supplier, service provider, and you haven't moved to implementation, but maybe looking to implement in 2015. Or perhaps you're in the education process where you haven't conceptually decided to go ahead. You're still really wanting to understand the implications, the benefits, the business case. If you haven't already ticked the button appropriate to you, please do so. Closing the poll, ladies and gentlemen, in 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look at the results coming up on your screen now. So none of you that are on the webinar today have been live with e-invoicing for over 5 years. 31% of you are somewhere between implementation and been doing this for under 5 years or less than 5 years. None of you are in the just starting out or just gone live phase. 23% of you are evaluating, so this is particularly good timing for you to be on this webinar, and just shy of 50% of you are in the education process. So hopefully some of the stats that were shared with, by Ben and Lydia will be motivating you in the direction of evaluation, proper evaluation and implementation. Thank you very much indeed. Now let's move through to questions, ladies and gentlemen. So if you haven't already sent me your questions, please do so, but we do have a good number coming up here now, so now's your chance. I'd like to put a question to you, Ben, in particular. You were talking about the ability to mandate the message. Could you just talk about how your suppliers responded to that mandate, please?
Sure. Mostly positive. Again, such a big vendor community, approaching 30,000, you get a wide variety of vendors, companies, organizations, from mom and pop shops all the way up to the Xeroxes and Dells and of the world. So yeah, we had a variety of responses. But the key thing was, once we hit the mandate, we had been talking with our vendor community routinely since 2007. So there's a good 6 years there of communicating, cajoling, agitating to get them on board. So the message wasn't new, it wasn't surprise, and it wasn't out of left field. And then even when we did have that mandate in hand and could legally return their invoices unpaid, we still waited another 7 months before we actually did that. Because we know especially for the large organizations, it's the old analogy about a speedboat and a cruiser out there. Turning it is like turning an aircraft carrier. It takes a little time. So we were sensitive to that and appreciated that. And even then, if they were having some problems, we would still take in paper invoices for them as long as they were employed in adopting electronic invoicing. As long as they didn't use that as a stall tactic, we would still take their invoices and process them as long as they made that commitment to transition over to electronic invoicing. So yeah, there was a wide variety of reactions to it, but all in all, I would say positive.
Okay, good. So your recommendation to other organizations within healthcare about taking this approach, Ben, what would that be?
Well, probably wouldn't be very much of a surprise, but it's the old communication thing. I myself, I wouldn't advocate being too aggressive with it because there's folks who are working for you and providing services to you, and you don't want to alienate them. But if you can clearly communicate a timeline, if you've got that ability of kind of the soft sell, starting with it and then continue to talk about the logic of electronic invoicing, and then gradually make sure you give them a lot of heads up and warning, implement the mandate, and require that they transition over. That would be my recommendation.
Okay, good. So this is a question I'll put it either to Peter or to Chad. What is the actual process for Tungsten to be considered HIPAA compliant?
So great question, and we could probably take a lot of time to address that. You know, HIPAA compliance is really around data security, and we've got an entire policy procedure that, you know, I'd be happy to go through, but, you know, there's lots of things that we do, making sure that, you know, only certain people have access to the data, that the data resides in a compliant, you know, data center. You know, we do have a specific data center set up in the U.S., you know, for this, even though it's not necessarily mandated by the act that it says that the data has to be on U.S. shore. We've gone ahead and taken that on and gone ahead and set up the data center so that the data does stay within the U.S. But it is all about data security, who's got access to it, you know, and the controls and the processes around it, at least from being able to manage and hold the data from a network perspective. And then there's clearly, you know, as a provider like Dana-Farber, you know, there's things that they are obligated to do as well as part of the process.
Sounds good. So question to Lydia and also to Ben. To what degree are you and within your organizations now taking advantage of early payment discounts because of the faster invoice handling? So Lydia, could we start with you, please?
At the moment, we are not taking advantage of the early payment function. We lost that. We probably should have taken advantage of it at that point when we first looked at Tungsten, but it is definitely a benefit to look into.
Okay,
Yep.
And how about you, Ben?
Yeah, from our perspective, we do take advantage of discounts, and that's another metric that we track very carefully. But we're a little unique in the last 2 years. If you haven't been keeping up with the government and government finances and things like that, you probably will recall that in the middle of the Great Recession, the executive branch took action to speed up the payment of all invoices. So under the Prompt Payment Act, we're allowed to hold, or we're required to pay is probably a better way of saying it. We're required to pay before the 30-day mark. The new policy that's been in effect for now going on 2.5 years is that we pay within 15 days. So it kind of undermines our ability to capture those discounts, but to the degree that we can, we do actively go after discounts, and electronic invoicing and Tungsten has made that easier.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Peter, my final question, and I'll put this to you, obviously as somebody working within Tungsten, but obviously working with a number of companies on their e-invoicing programs, what's your word of advice to people who are in the evaluation stage and the education stage?
If I had only one word of advice, but I'll try to sneak in two, it would be to consider very, very carefully the onboarding capabilities that your candidates have. This is not just about you as the buying organization and what works for you. You need to find partners who are able to create a value proposition for your suppliers as well. Also look to other capabilities.
So yeah, we are. Oh.
sorry.
Okay, we are pretty much out of time. So, ladies and gentlemen, many thanks for joining us today. Ben, Lydia, Peter, you were all great panelists, and Chad, you were a fantastic interviewer, so many thanks indeed. If I could just draw your attention to a couple of events that we have coming up on the Shared Services Link program. So if you're interested to find out more about dynamic discounting, supply chain financing, join us in Scottsdale on the 24th and 25th of February. And then if you've got any peers within the UK, or if you fancy a trip to London yourself to find out more about how to do shared services really well, and e-invoicing will of course be a topic of conversation. Leaders Shared Services Summit. And then we've got a few more events for you, webinars coming up for you. Tungsten will be back in the next week, I believe, talking about the 5 things a process owner needs to know. That's essential for anyone doing electronic invoicing, so do come and join Tungsten again for that, and a couple of more that will apply to you as well. So many thanks for joining us today, and thank you to my specialists, my experts, and I look forward to welcoming you next time. Thank you and goodbye.